What does it mean to vote biblically? Occupying Till He Comes at Southwest Prophecy Ministries. Welcome, friends. This is David Schnitker, your host for today's program. Thank you for joining us. Just a reminder that these programs are supported by your gifts to this ministry. If you would like to contribute to this ongoing faith ministry, which deals with Bible prophecy and current events, simply go to our website to contribute. Our website address is www.swpm.us. You will find a donate link on the homepage. The website address again is www.swpm.us. Thank you for your prayers and support for this faith ministry. It is a great privilege to have Carol Rushton back on the program today and next week to discuss her brand new October 2020 Last Days Beacon article entitled Voting Biblically. I just happen to have a copy of the article right here, right in front of me. Well, if you would like extra copies of this particular article, I'll share how to do that at the end of today's program. I've had the joy of knowing and working with Carol for many years at a previous ministry and for over 5 years at Southwest Prophecy Ministries. Carol is an accomplished author and broadcaster, and had the privilege of living in Jerusalem for 8 years while working at the Jerusalem Post. She recently authored the book, Understanding Israel and the Middle East, for our ministry. If you've not yet ordered this 175-page book, let me encourage you to go to the bookstore and do so. The name of the book again, Understanding Israel and the Middle East. 175-page book that clears up many of the lies, deception, and propaganda that you often hear in the mainstream press regarding the Middle East and Israel. Well, Carol is one of the best researchers and writers I have ever known. She has had great training since childhood, as her late father, Noah Hutchings, authored over 100 books and recorded over 10,000 radio programs in his very productive ministry for the Lord. And Carol began editing radio scripts for her father in the 8th grade. So she has a great background in terms of Bible research and in researching current events topics. And so I gave to her the timely task of researching the topic, voting biblically. And this is an extremely relevant subject as we are very close to the general election on November 3rd. So Carol, thank you for joining me today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's great to be here again.
Well, you've been a regular on our program through the years, and it's always great to have you in studio. So we're going to just jump right in. The title of your article is very succinct and direct, and you are that way too, succinct and direct.
I hope so.
Voting biblically. Well, what is voting biblically? Does the Bible tell you what party you're supposed to be aligned with and how you're supposed to vote on each particular candidate?
Well, it doesn't really say anything specifically about voting. We have to remember that the Bible is a book for Jews, written by Jews, and Israel really did not have a representative republic like we think of now. They were more considered a theocracy.
Yes.
And they did have representatives, but it was the priests and the elders, the Sanhedrin, these were their representatives. And it was more of a theocracy. They had, they had the religious rights that God had set available down for them to follow.
They did also have more of a monarchical type of government, as we get into the divided empire, divided kingdoms, the children would tend to follow in the footsteps of their parents. So there was a certain monarchical quality to the to Israel during the Old Testament.
Yeah, eventually it did become that, when they rejected Samuel and his sons, and they wanted a king, so God gave them a king. That didn't work out very well the first time, but then David became the king, and they would have good kings and bad kings. So.
Kind of a checkered record, but these
well, that happens in countries.
They tended to get worse with time. I noticed, at least in the northern kingdom. The southern kingdom had a few good ones, but most of them were bad.
Yes, unfortunately too.
And as you say, the Jewish people did not vote on their leadership, so that was not exactly what we have in a constitutional republic.
Yeah. But I think that they did have, God had laid down for them very clear values about what a king was supposed to do, how he was supposed to conduct himself. Moses talked about this because he warned them. He says, one day you're going to ask for a king. And so he made sure that they understood exactly what they would be getting.
And I remember the last words of David, I think 2 Samuel chapter 23, as David was preparing to die. He said, he that ruleth over men must be just, ruling in the fear of God.
Absolutely.
So here David, who was, despite his flaws, certainly the premier king in all of Israel's history. They reached their greatest heights in terms of power and territory under King David. He at least laid out there some basic elements of what does a king or ruler need to be. He needs to be just, ruling in the fear of God.
Absolutely.
And so what then, in light of that fact that Israel was not a constitutional republic and there were no voting, there were no elections,
right.
What does the Bible then say about voting, if anything?
Well, again, it doesn't really say specifically about voting. We have to remember, again, this, during the time of the Bible, and during the time the Bible was written, you had empires. And that's what the background of the Bible was produced against. You had the Assyrian Empire, you had the Hittite Empire, you had the Egyptian Empire, you had all of the Babylonian Empire, you had all of these empires. So there was not that background that we think of. However, the Bible does have things to say. In Proverbs it says, when the righteous rule, the people are happy. When the wicked rule, the people mourn.
Boy, we've seen that over and over again throughout history, haven't we?
Yes, even in our own country.
We
sure have. David wrote in Psalms, "Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord." So I think that there are, and I list some of the passages in the article, and that God has very clear standards for rulers, however they come into power. He has very clear standards, and of course the Bible is very clear that the more responsibility that God gives you, the greater you are to be judged. So you have more responsibility, then you have a greater responsibility to God to live up to His standards.
Absolutely. Well, friends, if you've just tuned in, we are interviewing Carol Rushton today regarding her latest article entitled Voting Biblically. We are going to take a quick time out now to hear from our sponsor, Freedom Health Alliance. Friends, we have a brand new sponsor of the Southwest Prophecy Ministry podcast. It is Freedom Health Alliance, a wonderful independent company that produces some tremendous products for your health and safety. As you are aware, we are experiencing escalated attacks on our personal rights and freedoms. This includes a complete and utter war on natural health products. We are right around the corner from the cold and flu season. Freedom Health Alliance strongly encourages the silver liquid and the silver gel to help support the immune system naturally through the upcoming season for your families. Silver gel, as you can see in the dispenser bottle, can be an amazing hand purifier. Unlike the hand sanitizers that are being forced on us that contain ethanol, alcohol, and numerous toxic chemicals, these hand sanitizers actually strip the good bacteria from our skin, leaving our immune system open and compromised to further attack. Freedom Health Alliance Active Silver Gel is 100% natural. It contains no toxic chemicals and is pH balanced to work in harmony with the immune system. Many people are shifting to silver liquid, which you can take internally. A couple of spoonfuls a day will help your immune system, and silver gel to help boost your immune systems this time of year. Thank you. Welcome back. We're going to continue our discussion with Carol. The next question is, should Christians vote biblically, and is it even possible for Christians to vote biblically? Are there biblical standards that can guide a person as they head into that voting booth on November 3rd?
Yes, I definitely think so. The Bible is very clear about morality. All you have to do is read the first 5 books of the Bible. God is very clear about what is His standard, what His standard is for people, for nations,
you talking
for
about
government.
The 10 suggestions?
The 10
is that
suggestions.
what you're talking about?
the 10 Commandments.
Oh, okay, they're commandments.
The 10 Commandments.
Okay.
And Christians should definitely follow that. All people should follow those.
Should we evaluate politicians in regard to their obedience to the 10 Commandments?
I think so. I think that's a
we're
good
not at
standard.
theocracies, but do they apply to the character of politicians?
Yes, I think so, because a man's character shows you what he is really going to be like when he's in office. If he's a good person, if he runs his business ethically and honestly, if he has great moral standards, these are things that you can look at and evaluate a person. And what does his stand on, for instance, marriage? What is his stand on life? What is his stand, or her stand, because we can elect both men and women in this country.
Oh yeah.
And we've had godly men and women serve in public office, and we've had ungodly men and women serve in public office. So you can. I think it's good to know what the standards are. For instance, Proverbs also says that you should not be a borrower, you should not be a lender. And Moses also cautioned Israel about getting into debt. And this was before, God took him, and right before they were to enter the promised land, he says, you're supposed to be the head and not the tail. And you can lend to other countries, but you should not borrow from other countries. Wow. You should not be a debtor nation. So things like this, I think, that are very important, that people can look at the character of a person, how they conduct themselves in their private life, their public life, how they run their business, what their dealings are with other people, and match them up to what God says in His Word. So I think that's very important. I think people can do that if they will. The problem is that most people really have no concept of what it means to vote according to biblical standards.
So you don't advocate that we separate our biblical morality or our religious views from this false separation of church and state, that you can have your personal views about what morality is or what your religious beliefs are, but that you shouldn't apply that to public figures?
Well, I think that you can, and I think that we should, because if we want to live in liberty, if we want to have civil liberty, we want to have religious liberty, we have to remember that those who fought in the 1770s and 1780s so that we could be free realized that you can't have civil liberty and not have religious liberty. They both go hand in hand. So, and they warned us, George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, they all warned that we answer to a higher power. And we must realize that liberty is liberty. And it doesn't mean that we have to be libertines, but we have to have a good moral standard. Or John Adams wrote about this very clearly. We have to have virtue as a nation. If we don't have virtue as a nation, we're not going to have a nation.
Let me quote from your article. You quote from George Washington in his farewell address. And he said, "Let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. Whatever may be conceded to the influence of refined education on minds of peculiar structure, reason, and experience, both forbid us to expect that national morality can prevail in the exclusion of religious principle. So Washington certainly didn't believe in a artificial separation of church and state.
No, he did not, and neither did any of the founders. Actually, that phrase, separation of church and state, comes from a private letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to the Danbury Baptist Church, and it was a letter assuring them that government was not going to encroach upon their religious liberties. They were still going to be able to go to church. They were still going to be able to worship God as they chose, and he was not going to do anything to harm that liberty. So the separation of church and state has been lifted out of that letter and used erroneously by many, many people.
I recall that it was in 1947 under a liberal Supreme Court, they enshrined this principle of the separation of church and state, and they got that from the Constitution of the USSR.
Yeah.
That's actually a Soviet principle. It is not an American principle.
No, not at all.
Right.
Not at all. Never has been.
Yeah. Well, Carol, we're out of time for today's podcast. Thanks for joining me today. We are going to continue this.
Okay.
Next week, we're just getting started. So, friends, we are offering Carol's excellent article to accompany this interview. It's our October 2020 Last Days Beacon article entitled Voting Biblically. And you may order 5 copies for a donation of $5 or 25 copies for a $15 contribution. Just go to our website, www.swpm.us, and go to our bookstore, type in the subject, Voting Biblically. The website address again, www.swpm.us. Well, friends, thank you for joining us for today's podcast. And I look forward to seeing you next time as we continue to discuss voting biblically. Until then, this is your host, David Schnitker. Thanks for listening.